and blue for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Hi guys, I'm Ellie and welcome to Susty Talks. Today I am chatting with Poppy Martinez, where we will chat about decolonizing fashion, what it means in the midst of the colonialization in the fashion industry, the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, and how we can make a difference in our everyday lives. If you're new here, Susty Talks is basically a community-centered podcast that aims at sparking genuine conversations about ethical fashion, sustainable change, and intersectional solutions. I really do hope it becomes an online space where we can drive positive change and empower action to really make sustainability more accessible and relevant to everyone. And this is a self-funded initiative. I offer vintage clothing on both eBay and Depop. So if you want to support me, the links will be in my description. And I'm also working on a Mexican artisanal denim collection that hopefully will come out in October in Chicago Fashion Week. So look forward to that. But without further ado, let's talk to Poppy. Yay. So I'm here with Poppy. I'm super excited. Thank you so much for jumping on. It's a
Thank
Friday,
you.
which is, yeah, it's a Friday. So this is a hustle for both of us. But I mean, it just shows that we both really care about, the solutions in the fashion industry and taking more of a deep dive into the nuances. So I'm super excited to talk about decolonizing fashion, the colonialism that's in the fashion industry, distinguishing cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation, and the nuances to that. So, to get started, feel free to introduce yourself and what do you want listeners to know about you?
Yeah. So I'm Poppy Martinez. I am currently an undergraduate student at Drexel University. I am studying a custom design major, which means I sort of like cater a specific plan of study to me. My major is fashion anthropology. And so what I'm doing is studying fashion and dress through a critical interdisciplinary lens, particularly through anthropology, to understand its relationship with culture, society, and identity. And yeah, and I've been involved in research since my freshman year. I'm currently a third year, so I'm a year away from graduation. Very exciting. And I am very invested in anything relating to culture and fashion, specifically the Eurocentric part of fashion and breaking that down, and same time elevating marginalized voices within the fashion industry and fashion system. I'm from Venezuela originally, so I'm really passionate also about Latin American fashion narratives.
Whoa, I'm so impressed. I feel like you're a sisty baddie. I'm in awe. What a queen. I'm super
Thank
excited to get
you.
into yeah, I'm super excited to get into the podcast. So I follow you on social media and I saw you share a lot of your work. So feel free to share what you've been working on in more detail, what drives your work, what inspires you, anything that you want to share of what you've achieved. And then why does it matter? It's these are huge questions, so feel free to expand, take your time. We are literally grabbing our drink and listening and vibing.
Sure. So I'm sort of going to start from the beginning of what inspired my journey. Actually started as a fashion design student. I had dreamt with being a fashion designer since I was 6 years old. I got into this like the fashion design program at Drexel is pretty amazing. I started my first semester, liked it, but then I slowly realized I was sort of like lacking that intellectual stimulation. And so part of Drexel's curriculum is a class on sustainable practice in fashion, which involves some research. And turns out I really loved it. And I had the luck of having a professor, a mentor that like encouraged me to sort of like explore that path. And so that second semester of college, I began working on my first research project under my professor. We were investigating a Nigerian dress practice known as ashwebi. It's a dress tradition where in important celebrations, guests and celebrants dress in the same fabrics, clothes, and styles as a symbol of solidarity and fraternity. And we did a comprehensive ethnographic and qualitative study of the practice. We interviewed people. I went and actually dressed up in an asoebi and went to a celebration. It was an amazing experience. And that I realized that fashion has so many facets that we need to explore. And not only that, but like fashion can exist in any context. And so even though like Africa's not my focus, it was sort of like an introduction to move. How can I translate that to my own context of where I come from? And so afterward, I took my first independent research project, which is the one you sort of like noticed. It was a post-colonial critique on resort wear, particularly the 2024 resort collection from Dior, which was inspired by Mexican artistry, Mexican indigenous artistry particularly, and Mexican figures such as Frida Kahlo. And that was my first independent research project that I got to present last November at the International Textiles and Apparel Association conference. It was a big achievement for me. I was very excited.
Yes,
And
queen.
thank you. Thank you. And since then, I've been sort of like right now, I'm continuing to working on some projects, especially for my senior thesis. We're still figuring that out, but hoping to sort of continue expanding on Latinx identities and Latin American fashion. Yeah.
Yeah, those are all such great things. I also got my start in learning about sustainable fashion in college. It was actually through a random essay that my English professor made me read about sweatshops. And at first I was like, wait, I think I've heard of this. And then I just kept researching it on Google and I kept asking more and more questions of why things are and how this is happening. And it's actually really nice to have professors that are so invested in this topic, especially within
Yeah.
what you would think is like conservative academic topics. But I was lucky enough to personally go to like a liberal arts college where they taught an array of topics and they really want people to be well-rounded and have like a holistic view to things. So without that introduction through a random like sweatshop article, I probably wouldn't even be in this world. So I also learned about this through college. Um, and having a
Yeah.
professor that literally helps support you and like teach you about this topic and then have you experience a firsthand experience must have been super empowering. And to continue on to learn and also disseminate the information is super impactful and super great to see. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious how you see and how you break down the colonialism that you've noticed in the fashion industry and how Eurocentrism, well, I cannot say that word, how Eurocentrism, how do you say it? How Euros,
Eurocentrism.
there you go, is present in the fashion system.
Yeah. So if we think of the fashion system as we know it right now, it was founded in colonialism. The fashion supply chain goes back to the Silk Road, which is pretty much based on colonialism. And that's how, for instance, Columbus, quote unquote, discovered America and colonialism started. So we cannot deny that fashion exists without colonialism. Some important ways we see colonialism reflected in fashion today is, for instance, how we view the concept of fashion. When you ask someone, what is fashion? They will think, oh, it's couture, Paris, Europe, Milan, and stuff. And actually, in fashion history, costume history, there are two mainstream theories of the origin of fashion. The first theory being that fashion did not exist until the 17th century in France, where the first like couturiers and dressmakers started making sort of like mass-produced ready-to-wear clothing. While the second theory is that fashion has always existed in all concepts, in all contexts, sorry. And so, yeah, like the question of where does fashion come from is very important, because there are people that like will assert that fashion does not exist in non-Western contexts. And that's why we hear terms like folk dress or like traditional costume, which are sort of words to disregard fashion as a non-Western concept as well. Um, the other way we see colonialism in fashion is through the monopoly of fashion capitals. again, fashion is so like centralized in these ginormous Western capitals such as Paris, Milan, London, and New York. And we think that fashion can only thrive in those Western contexts. Meanwhile, there are millions of other fashion scenes around the world. There are pretty big ones in Colombia, Brazil, Spain, etc. Um, that we don't really speak of because they're not the big four. So an important aspect of like acknowledging the colonialism of fashion is to sort of break down that order that fashion can exist outside of those cities and can thrive outside of those contexts. And also the third way is of the creator versus the maker. In fashion, we also have the idea of, oh my God, who do we think of fashion designers? They're like big figures, the creative directors and stuff, but we don't talk about the people that are actually making the clothes, which most are located in the global south or the non-West, usually in overexploited countries, in very marginalized contexts, underpaid, etc. And we don't talk about the makers, just the creators and the figure of the fashion genius. But the truth is, fashion is not possible as the way it is right now without exploiting um, particularly countries and people that have experienced colonialism before.
It's such a shame how we're currently entrenched in what is called fast fashion, which is,
Yeah,
where clothing is made very rapidly, very cheaply from major brands that don't seem to want to change their ways and seem to be stuck and almost obsessed with holding all the power, all the money that they can
yeah,
get from producing all this cheaply made clothing that at the end of the day is not that cute. Like if you take a walk in the mall or if you look online, brands like Shein are not really making things that are stuff that we're gonna wear for the rest of our lives. Like it's meant to fall apart, it's meant to be thrown away. There's this
yeah,
idea that they're making it for someone to wear for like 2, maybe 3 weeks max, so they can continue to buy and buy and buy. And this rapid, cycle of production and then disposal is just crazy. And it's affecting the global south, those that are the most vulnerable to exploitation, to the climate crisis. They're literally facing the brunt of this greed, this rampant consumerism, rampant production. Um,
yeah. And what is also really disappointing for me, and for all of us that are aware of the dangers of fast fashion, is that there is a very distorted way of like how much clothes cost, because we got so used to like a t-shirt. Everyone thinks a t-shirt shouldn't cost more than $20, but the thing is that it only costs $20 because we're exploiting people and because we're underpaying people and because we're getting bad quality materials. And so it's very hard to like get out of the mindset because also like everyone has economic struggles. But the truth is, and this is something really valuable that I was able to sort of like really internalize and accept while taking those fashion design courses, making clothes is so much effort. So much effort, and
it
it is not
really is.
acknowledged. It's so much effort, and also the cost of materials. Like whenever I see again like a t-shirt under like $30, I'm shocked because I know there is no way it can cost less than $20 unless they've made like 20,000 of them, which
Or
is what
they've cut
happens.
corners somehow, or they've just like
Yeah,
not pay their workers. Yeah.
yeah. One of my favorite facts is that if we stop producing clothes right now, there'll still be enough clothes for the next 6 generations. And that
That
is
that
crazy.
statistic is crazy. Oh my gosh. I
Yeah,
also keep thinking that every single day. I'm like, okay, I really want this cute top, but there's enough clothing to clothe the next 6 generations. And I feel like that statistic is so mind-boggling. Sometimes I can't even visualize it, but then I see
yeah,
like TikToks or like YouTube videos. I'm like, I'm only seeing a portion of that fact, only a small percentage. Like these clothing are being dumped in Chile and Africa and so many different countries to the point where they're burning it because
yeah.
they don't want all the stuff that's being shipped to them.
Yeah, and yeah, again, where are they dumping them? In overexploited countries that have been previously affected by colonialism. And today is not colonialism, but it's imperialism and sort of the economic and political control that Western empires have over those overexploited countries. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, it's such a shame, and that's just the current state of our fashion industry. But I've seen so many people step up to envision a new way forward, see how we can create positive change, even when it feels so small and so insignificant in the midst of everything. But I think systemic change really is needed. We individuals can come together as a collective to do what matters
Yeah.
and push the needle. There's a lot of fashion laws, fashion policies, um, politicians even that are emerging to create the change that we need. It's a very slow moving process, but I think more and more people are becoming aware. There's been a Netflix documentary recently that came out exposing a lot of the truths. I think it was boho, I think they talked about. But it was one brand they highlighted and just how lucrative the whole fashion industry really is. And honestly, it's a race to the bottom. Fashion isn't really produced to empower cultures, to empower a sense of self. It's not to make us feel beautiful, really. I think it's the opposite. We often want to, adopt these trends to fit in so that we can fit the ideas of standards often enough. I'm not saying this is everyone's case, obviously. I'm not going to generalize that much of what fashion means to everyone, but the fashion industry has almost become warped into just a means to almost blend in. And I feel like it does take bravery from those that don't want to support fast fashion to step away from conformity, to step away from the system that's dominated by so many brands and be like, no, like this is wrong. Like the whole cycle of everything is wrong. And I actually want to like get to know myself. I want to empower myself. I want to, uplift cultures. I want to uplift real stories, real art in the fashion industry. And I think this touches on cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. So, can you expand on what this could look like for Western consumers who are essentially entrenched in fast fashion and may not know how to, appreciate cultures, may have never been exposed to some cultures? I know you talked about like artisanal fashion and your interest in Latin America. So, if you can give some lens to that. And then how does that relate to white saviorism, especially when there is a lot of white men leading the current fashion brands that we see and maybe buy from?
Yeah. So I'm first going to introduce the concept of cultural appropriation. So cultural appropriation consists of a practice in overall design. This does not only happen in fashion, and it's important to acknowledge that as well. It refers to the taking of particular elements of a culture, design elements or material elements. So it can be, there are different types of appropriation, which I won't really get into it, but it can be like a motif, a complete style, a complete garment. And when that item is taken out of its original context, stripped of its meaning, or altered in a way that it's not recognizable, does not match with its original, again, meaning or symbolism, that would be cultural appropriation. And basically, any way that sort of like erases the history or heritage of that original item can qualify as cultural appropriation. And so cultural appropriation can look in many ways. We have, for instance, I don't remember the year, but for instance, in the Victoria's Secret, um, had a really big scandal back, I think in like 2012, because there was a model wearing this like feathered hat, which was supposed to
Mm.
be a reference to Native Americans. But it was very insensitive because, again, it was a runway in underwear and it was the white European model. So, and then they didn't acknowledge which tribe it belonged to, the history. Again, the purpose of those of that headdress is very, very traditional and follows a specific ritual, and they did not acknowledge any of it. So that is one of, for example, the most extreme cases of cultural appropriation. However, there can be more subtle ways of cultural appropriation. In my project, for instance, I studied one of those. So for a little bit of background, the 2024 resort wear collection of Dior, again, was inspired by Mexican culture, Mexican indigenous arts history, and Frida Kahlo. And so they collaborated with indigenous artisans from Oaxaca to sort of like design Mexican inspired pieces with the Dior label. And so basically, what I studied was sort of like the power dynamics and how colonialism was still reflected in a post-colonial context, which is what post-colonialism as a discipline studies. And what I found is that even though the media portrayed this as an instance of cultural appreciation, sorry, it was not for the following reasons. So, for instance, they took a huipil, which is a traditional Mexican indigenous attire, which consists normally on a rectangular piece of fabric with three slits, two for arms and one for the neck. And so the Dior for this collection redesigned the huipil using Western pattern making methods, which are very different. And in addition, they also took some traditional Oaxacan pieces that are for men and turned it into women. And what I pointed out the most is that the collaboration was not truly a collaboration because they just have the artisans for labor. A collaboration needs to also involve the um, the indigenous people, the artisans, in the creative process. And that did not happen. Instead, again, it was the European genius behind the design and the colonialized, marginalized people doing the actual labor. Yeah. And
Which
so
is
that's
such
how,
a shame. It's such a shame that happened. It's like
yeah,
they want to do good, but in a way they don't end up doing what they should because often enough there's no consultation with that culture, with those that
yeah.
are Latin American, for example.
Yeah, and another aspect of it was also how, again, these traditional garments were also alterated to please a Western palate. For instance, as you may know, Mexican traditional attire or like indigenous pieces are often really beautiful, really colorful, have lots of embroidery, um, and are very accessorized. In this case, they literally toned down the colors. It was all beige of like soft pink, again, to please the European palette and altering that to, again, please their European rich market. And
Which
so
is
it
such
stopped
a
being,
shame.
yeah, yeah. And that's a more subtle case of cultural appropriation. Now, cultural appreciation is sort of described as a respectful engagement with cultural items or items that include cultural references. And so this is a very tricky topic because we're still trying to figure out what is considered appropriate for appreciation or not. And so from what I've studied, from what I've seen, I can sort of like explain it as, for instance, if you truly like connect with an item, let's say from an item from a Mexican indigenous culture, if you really connect with that with being, for instance, what you can do is learn about its history, learn about its meaning, familiarize yourself with the actual practice of making a huipil, and most importantly, go to Mexican artisans, go to the people that actually make it. If you can take it from an indigenous Mexican artisan, perfect. And as long as you do it in a respectful manner, acknowledging its meaning, acknowledging its history, acknowledging the context in which it's worn, that's also important. Even if you familiarize yourself with an item um, from whatever culture, but you weren't in an inappropriate context, that can also be offensive for members of that culture. And in terms of white saviorism, again, it's like the intention in which you do it. Do you do it because you want to be like cool and unique, because you want to be like foreign, etc.? Because that's one thing. Fashion thrives in novelty. And so really reflecting on ourselves of why are we acquiring this item? Why do I want this? Is it because I'm engaging with the culture? Is it because I'm interested in learning more? Is it because I'm curious? Or is it because I just want to post it on Instagram that I'm supporting local artisans? So yeah, it's a difficult question that requires a lot of constant dialogue with oneself and your context as well, and continued education. I think education and knowledge is really powerful in this case, and never stop asking questions and never stop learning.
Yeah, I think learning is so powerful. I totally respect everything that you said. I think the research and intentionality, asking questions and continuing the process over and over again, I think is just a metaphor on life and just growing as a person. Like obviously we're not gonna know everything when we first start off. We have to start somewhere. Um, it's just I feel like there's what I'm sensing right now, a discrepancy of like making mistakes as someone that's new, but pure in intention versus like these fashion brands that are often enough
Yeah.
maliciously stealing from very talented, diverse people across the world for the name of profit, status, new designs. So I think making mistakes in itself is natural when we're beginning this process, but fashion brands have just taken this a whole different level. And I don't really think they're being ethical or sustainable within that process whatsoever when they, turn to cultures to make collections, which is very, very unfortunate. Um, so I
Right.
personally hope that on a systemic level, more fashion brands can adopt cultural appreciation, but that would imply stop stealing from, you know, talented designers that are often small and independent from wherever they're at. They usually get their inspiration or they're copying inspiration from anyone, honestly. Like everyone can be a victim, unfortunately. And then like the legal aspect of this is just astounding. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah. For anyone interested in sort of learning more about the legal aspects of cultural appropriation, this is one of my favorite books. It's called Who Owns Culture? Let
oh.
me see the author by Susan Scafidi. It's a wonderful book. It does have a lot of like legal jargon. However, it has some amazing insight on why it is so hard to protect indigenous cultural property, like intellectual property,
Mhm.
and why it's so hard again to put protections on collective art or collective material versus individual material. It has some really great insights, and I highly recommend it if you want to learn more about cultural appropriation from a legal standpoint.
hmm I've been seeing some like lawsuits with like Lululemon where they got in like a copyright lawsuit. I don't know the details, but I feel like brands are always facing this in the sense that like they make collections that are very similar to other people's work. And then it's like, okay, like did they really copy them? Was it inspiration? Like maybe it's unavoidable in some sense. And then some people like fake ignorance, like, oh, I didn't see what the other person was doing. I just made this on the top of my brain, like it was an original thought. But I'm kind of curious, this is a bit off topic, but how would you say we can culturally appreciate like Latin American artistry? You mentioned that you're Venezuelan, interested in like artisanal work, so how could we appreciate that a bit more?
Yeah. So the first step in Latin American fashion, and this is something I love to talk about, is getting rid of the like Caribbean tropical chic thing. Because when you think of like Latin American fashion, you may think of like oh my God, like bikinis or like flowers, really bright colors, but that's not the standard for all Latin American fashion. The first thing is to do your research and find the thousands of incredible contemporary designers in Latin America, some of them which are indigenous and engage with indigenous motifs or styles and sort of like reinterpret them to a contemporary context. So there are a lot of resources online to learn about them, a lot of blogs that talk about um, Latin American designers and creators. So I would say first and foremost, go to the source. Many of them are also based in the United States or Europe. So it's not like you have to go to the country to get whatever you want. So I would say like doing your research, taking advantage of the resources there are many creators on TikTok, Instagram sharing about this Latin American designers and stuff. But yeah, so in the concept of Latin America, you're like embracing that if whatever you can think of like H&M or like even formal wear, there are Latin American designers that make those. So
Yeah, even
yeah.
as a Mexican American, I often am continuously asking questions and like thinking about, okay, like my ancestry must be related to some sort of artistic skill. And I think it's a journey back to myself in a sense and learning about my past, like where did they come from, what did they believe in, and how do they put that into clothing. And even if it's not like an aesthetic thing, like just learning a stitch that my great grandmother, used to do on a piece of clothing is so impactful, more so than like a fast fashion piece would ever have on me. But that moment wouldn't have come about if I hadn't asked questions like how do they used to consume clothing in Mexico? Like how do they fix their things? Like what stitches do they use? And then like how do they actually make it into like an artistic garment, which is like a whole other thing. But there's so many small nuances that's so unbelievable. But when you are raised in the United States, like me personally, I've lost a lot of my sense of culture, a lot of my sense of like my past. I've assimilated, unfortunately, and sometimes I'm like, am I even appreciating my own culture? Like, do I even understand this? Like, am I honoring it? So it's a real journey. But I'm really grateful that I can always pick up a book or, pick up the phone and ask my grandmother, like, hey, can you tell me stories of your youth? Like, how did you spend time with your mom? Which moms are usually the ones that are passing down these
Yeah.
artisanal, like skill-based, um, fashion-related things and knowledge. So, what was the content creator that you were talking about?
Oh yeah, I found it here. Tammy from the internet. I'm gonna type it in the chat so maybe you
Tammy
can put
from
it.
the, yeah, I'll put it in the description. Yeah, there's a bunch of awesome people that are online sharing constantly.
Oh
Cami
yeah.
from the internet. Nice. Um, so this kind of leads me into my next question. I feel like this topic and all these learnings can feel a bit like too big or too difficult to, I don't know, take on. So is there any like practical tips normal people who have like a 9 to 5 can take on, can do in midst of tackling decolonization in the fashion industry?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's all about continue to asking questions in your everyday practices. One of my favorite exercises to sort of like think about my consumption habits is to look at my closet and see where are my clothes made from? Where did I buy them? What was the last time I bought these clothes? How many times am I wearing these clothes? And sort of like reflecting on that. And then you realize like, hey, there are some things I could change. Um, Again, also prioritizing non-Western perspectives or at least local made clothes. So if you're interested in buying something for any event or you're missing a piece that you really want, try to find alternatives. First and foremost, prioritize that, or even like thrifting, etc., or over going to this like corporations and conglomerates in fashion. Also, creating dialogue with your community and people around you. If you see someone buying from Shein or H&M, like talk to them about them. Create dialogue, like why are they doing that? Have you thought about doing it this other way, maybe thrifting or going to this other store? You like people don't realize the impact a simple conversation can have on someone. It's happened to me in my own family. I have a sister that likes to buy from Shein a lot, and I sit down with her and I try to explain to her like, hey, when you do that, here's what you're supporting, or here's what you contributed towards. So those little conversations in your day-to-day life with your family, coworkers, friends can really have a lasting impact. Again, as you were saying earlier, sometimes we put a lot of like guilt and pressure on ourselves to be the change, but we don't like we're not going to change the world on our own, but we can put a little bit piece by piece. So we can do what we can, and that's okay. It's okay. We can't change the world one day to the other. But again, like having that mentality, that imagination of we can, it's important. And so taking every little step matters. And also, again, like elevating the role of the artisan or the creator. Find people that like make their own clothes, make from their own brands, instead of like again like going to fabric like fabricates in China, etc. Because even there are some local brands that although they seem local or handmade, they're actually just mass produced in China or Vietnam. So like trying to find brands that make small batches, etc., and that are the creators and not are the artisans and makers, not just the creators. And also, when you learn about fashion history, try to prioritize global perspectives as well. Unfortunately, the literature on global fashion history isn't as vast, but there are some. My favorite book, for instance, is A Global History of Fashion.
You said the global
Yeah,
history of fashion. Oh, nice.
the Cambridge Global History of Fashion. It's a pretty good spot to begin with. It discusses multiple perspectives. And again, sort of like when you think of where fashion comes from, be more open-minded that it can exist outside the West. Yeah.
I love all these resources. I definitely have two books to read now, Who Owns Culture and The Global History of Fashion, which is all amazing and needed tools. I I really resonate with all your tips. I think for me, it's like questioning on an everyday basis what all of this means and what it means not only for myself, but like systemically. Um, to give you a little story, when I started off learning about sustainable fashion, it like blew my mind. I could not wrap my head around it. And every time I would go to a resale store, I would honestly get a panic attack because all this information I had was in my head, but I felt so overwhelmed and I didn't know what to do with everything. And I would keep telling my parents and my siblings, this is what's happening. We need to like stop. We need to tell the managers to stop restocking. Like we can't keep doing this. And I felt so much panic in the beginning. And my parents were like, what is happening to you? Like, why are you panicking in the store? And I literally had to sit down and show them the videos of sweatshops in the global south because they didn't get it. They were just literally thinking I was going crazy or coming up with random facts for whatever reason and crediting it to college stress because I was in school back then. And then I put my mom in the living room and I was like, you have to watch this because she didn't get it after explaining it and having like panic attacks in the store. And at first she couldn't believe it. She's like, no, this is not real. This is like a movie. This is not a documentary. And I said, no, like it's a documentary. It's real. For a lot of people, it can cause a lot of panic. It can cause a lot of stress. And maybe that inhibits you from taking action or knowing what to do, but I think we
Yeah,
need to channel all those negative emotions and keep moving forward. It's a daily practice. Like you
yeah,
said, change is not going to happen overnight, but if every single person did one thing every day, it does accumulate. And it just reinforces that we need collective effort for systemic change in midst of all of these things. Because again, fast fashion is like the root of colonization, of greed, of exploitation, and we're entrenched in it. And it's kind of hard to see ourselves outside of this system. But we can slowly tackle it. We can continue to do things that empower, local artisans that center them versus just like wearing something and then throwing it away. Like caring about art, caring about beauty, caring about others, about the planet is such a beautiful route to take in our everyday life. And it's so much better than like staying stuck in that panic, that anxiousness, like that resentfulness, that hate. Because again, like things are bad. They've been bad for a long time. They're getting worse within the current presidential times. But that shouldn't stop us from not caring and falling into apathy. So I guess my question now is, how would you advise someone that's working within the fashion industry? Um, what would you tell them? What would you like for them to work on?
yeah. So I would say the first step is revise your inspirations. Is it absolutely necessary to engage with cultural elements? Like, is it indispensable for the design? Because again, fashion works on novelty, and sometimes we think of like foreign items or cultural items as like, wow, that's new for this context. So again, revise inspirations. Is it like, are you doing it for the right reasons? Are there any alternatives for like being original work? If you really want to collaborate with indigenous makers or engage with culture for your creations, establish ethical plans that include, for instance, true collaboration, as I mentioned, not just labor, but actual creative participating in the creative process, also ensuring financial compensations to support these communities, because again, in the case of Dior, there wasn't any transparency on how the indigenous artisans were or were not compensated. So considering that, like how much are they collaborating? How are you supporting the community financially, with exposure, etc. And and yeah, like letting them have a fair share of participation in the process. So make an ethical plan. There are many ways to do this. Particularly in research, there are a lot of researchers that do consultancy for brands, designers, etc., to sort of be more culturally aware when doing these collaborations. So again, inviting stakeholders as well, inviting researchers, members from the culture community you're collaborating from to hold yourself and your creations and whatever content you're working, your company, your brand, etc., accountable. Not just you, but like other people that can sort of like check you out. Because a lot of this stuff that happens, a lot of these controversies, it can be like cultural appropriation or lack of diversity, etc., is because they weren't stakeholders in there that were able to call that out. Because again, like as a white or a European person, you're not really aware of these realities. So inviting people that like can sort of like catch on them better, it's very important um to have better a better, more decolonized fashion system. And so yeah, those are would be like the some steps I would advise someone working in the fashion industry to take.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I feel like what I took away from that is like you need a diverse team to just do things better. And like you learn so much more from each other versus like assuming or guessing or just being like, yeah, this is fine. Like we can probably do this without really holding yourself accountable to anyone within the brand. Um, but slow and steady, I think we can make the change. And I feel like at the end of the day, like I think about all the artisanal work that's out there that like blows my mind. I'm like, how do people do this? Like they spent their entire life to learn this skill, passed on from generations to generations to generations. And I'm lucky enough to have something from this culture, from these, like communities. I feel like I would never get rid of those things. And I went to Mexico and they're pretty expensive, but again, like these are things you're probably going to keep for the rest of your life. And I think
Yeah.
fashion is so much more beautiful when we actually really love and respect the thing that we have. And then understanding the story is so important because I know some artisans that dye the thread based on the season of the time, based on their emotions. Everything is one of a kind, unique. You will never find this. And that is just, uh, it's like it's like basically art on my skin. I'm like, I feel so privileged to have this on me. Like, why
Yeah,
are we
like
not all doing this?
yeah, and like again, like taking part of like being able to consume from local artisans, you're like again, all clothes have a history, but the fact that you can sort of like if someone asks you on the street, "Hey, I love your blouse," if you're wearing a weeping for example, "I love your blouse," you're able to tell them like, "Hey, like this was made handmade, handwoven by indigenous artisans in Mexico," and stuff like engaging this conversation and sharing culture with everyone else is also very valuable. And the fact that we have the materiality of cultures is something that like I really love, that how cultures, knowledge, identity can take a material form. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I love this. I also want to reckon with the fact before we close off the podcast that as fast fashion becomes more and more popular or increases in our closet, we are losing a bit of the artistry, obviously. Um, And because of that, artisans are on the decline. There's not a lot of brands, uplifting them, supporting them. They're often struggling to compete in the marketplace within the supply chain. And these again, these things are again a symptom of like exploitation of colonialism, of just how hard it is to be someone from certain cultures, especially with stigmas and all the hate and rhetoric that's happening. So I feel like we usually say we want to like revolt or we want to build huge movements, but I think if we even saw something as small as a revival of the artisanal industry, that would make so much difference because a lot of artisans right now are struggling to survive. They're often leaving their, their skills, their what's called their artisanal vocation to move to different countries to work in a factory or work in whatever. And these skills are being lost forever for generations. And that's such a shame. So I feel like if we don't invest in artisans and if we don't take a step back from fast fashion, we're going to lose so much of what makes us human and what makes us who we are. Because I don't think fast fashion at the end of the day really matters that much. Like, who are we kidding? Like, are we going to choose artisans or are we going to choose fast fashion? But that's kind of the choice individuals have to make. But again, systemically, we do need more laws, more action to protect these sort of, communities that are practicing artisanry. Um, and keep pushing them up to compete fairly with these major brands that are just essentially a monopoly at this point. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, that was a dark note to end off, but let me see how to tie that off. Damn. Okay.
I mean,
Um,
there are people speaking up, like you, your podcast, your platform, other bunch of creators on social media. There have been advocacy a lot, even in, like in the United States government and Congress for laws that protect the environment and makers. In California, I think there's a Garments Worker Protection Act, which seeks to again protect garment workers to ensure fair pay and fair conditions. And so, yeah, there are steps forward. I think definitely we can look at some protections in Europe, for example, which have really focused on environmental sustainability, which they've been doing like a decent job. And I think the United States could take a note from that. So again, advocating for these protections. And also, something that is important as the environment is the people behind our clothes. Um, and yeah, and just we have to stay positive. We have to keep fighting. We have to keep learning and imagining a future where we can all enjoy fashion in a sustainable, responsible manner.
yeah, beautifully said. I feel like even the best of us can get lost in the doom of like, how will this ever work? And like
For
getting
sure.
stuck in
Yeah.
the details. But I feel like dreaming, imagination, creativity, having hope really is empowering for everything that we're
Yeah.
doing. So thank you for reminding us of that. And hopefully every small step every single day can add up to make a difference. To end off the podcast, I'm kind of curious where we can find you and how we can support your work.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I usually post any projects or even recruitment I have to do for my research. So if you're interested in like learning what I'm up to, or you even participate in my projects, you can find me there. And yeah, so far I don't have like dedicated social media, maybe in the future. Um, but yeah, and there
Amazing.
is my contact information if anything, if any of your listeners want to engage in thoughtful conversations, have any doubts about anything I've shared today, I'll be welcome to speak with you.
Perfect. And we'll put all of that information in the description. But thank you so much, Poppy, for jumping
Thank
on.
you.
It was lovely.
Thank you so much for giving me a chance to sort of like share about my work and have these powerful, meaningful, important conversation. And thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Take care.
Bye.
In the blue, find me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.